The Inflation Reduction Act, which I did not vote for, but nevertheless, the Inflation Reduction Act said clearly that China, if you are a foreign entity of concern, you don't, which includes China, you don't get the taxpayer subsidy. You don't get the 30D subsidy. You don't get the tax break. And yet your rule allows Chinese companies to get the tax break. It loosens up the restrictions. So now we are subsidizing our rivals. I just don't understand. The chairman's asked you about this repeatedly. I don't understand why we would pay Chinese companies to outcompete us.
Welcome to VOC. Today, I'm breaking down an intense congressional hearing where Senator Josh Hawley goes head-to-head with the Department of Energy about electric vehicle policies. You're not going to want to miss this deep dive into how Biden's EV mandates might be impacting American workers and potentially benefiting China. Let's start with the big picture. Senator Hawley is raising some serious red flags about China's dominance in the electric vehicle market. Right now, China controls 60% of global EV production and a whopping 76% of lithium-ion battery production. Hawley argues that the current administration's policies are essentially pushing U.S. supply chains directly into China's hands. And get this, he claims these electric vehicles are incredibly expensive, costing around $77,000 more than traditional vehicles. That's not pocket change. If you're finding this shocking, make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay informed about these critical economic discussions.
I want to just talk a little bit about who is really benefiting from this administration's climate agenda and from these draconian electric vehicle mandates. So, Mr. Turk, you've already alluded to this. I know you know the answer to these questions. Currently, one nation accounts for 60% of the world's electric vehicle production. That nation is?
China.
Yeah. One nation accounts for 76% of the world's lithium-ion battery production. That nation is?
China.
Yet your administration, this president's administration, the mandates that you put in place require that 2/3 of our new vehicle sales in just the next 8 years, 2/3 of them be electric vehicles. Your policies are driving us and our supply chains into the hands of our greatest geostrategic enemy, enriching them, enriching their government, while forcing Americans to pay for electric vehicles that on average cost $7,000 more on average than a traditional vehicle, are more expensive to repair and insure, require more frequent replacements of everything from tires to component parts. So, Mr. Turk, why is it good for the American worker that we force our supply chains to a country that's our greatest rival and adversary? And why is it good for the American consumer?
So this is exactly why we're using all the tools that Congress gave us to diversify our supply chains, from the mining piece and especially the processing piece, which is where China really has a stranglehold. So we're making significant progress on lithium, on graphite, you name it, the tools that you all have given us to diversify those supply chains and make sure that we're getting the benefits of that. Our U.S. workers are getting the benefits of that. Citizens in St. Louis, I mentioned in my opening statement, some exciting investments that are going on in St. Louis. We want U.S. Workers to benefit from this supply chain and this revolution. And China is absolutely competing. China is going whole hog on EVs and the full supply chain of it. And they're going to compete and outcompete unless we're playing and pushing back and competing with them, which is what we're doing.
Here's what I don't understand then. Why is it, if that is the case, why is it that you are interpreting the administration's climate law, so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which I think, frankly, is bad enough on its own, but you're reinterpreting it now to allow the tax credits to flow to Chinese entities. So now U.S. tax dollars are literally subsidizing Chinese battery makers. Why would we want to do that? Why would we want to not only give our adversary our supply chains and our jobs, but pay them to take them from us? Why does that make any sense?
So I would argue, and certainly want to turn to my Deputy Secretary at Treasury, we are not doing that.
How are you not?
The fact that with the 30D tax credit, only 13 models qualify at this point. Now, we hope more diversification happens and more models qualify for that tax credit is a good data point that we take this very seriously, and we want to have these jobs in the U.S. But let me
wait. No, wait. I just want to stay with you, Mr. Turk, just because my time is so limited, and this is an important part. And the chairman's brought this up, and I'm glad that he has. This is really, really important. The Inflation Reduction Act, which I did not vote for, but nevertheless, the Inflation Reduction Act said clearly that China, if you are a foreign entity of concern, you don't, which includes China, you don't get the taxpayer subsidy. You don't get the 30D subsidy. You don't get the tax break. And yet your rule allows Chinese companies to get the tax break. It loosens up the restrictions. So now we are subsidizing our rivals. I just don't understand. The chairman's asked you about this repeatedly. I don't understand why we would pay Chinese companies to outcompete us.
So I would strongly disagree with that. I spent a lot of time working with the team, and we worked hand in hand with our Treasury colleagues on the FEOC, the Foreign Entity of Concern, the FEOC standards, and happy to go through the three prongs of that in particular in terms of what our proposal is on the table.
But I appreciate that answer, Mr. Turk, but you haven't really answered my question. I mean, let me read to you from another article. This is the Associated Press. And this isn't quoting someone, this is just a statement of fact. And I quote, if electric vehicles replace gas-powered ones, most UAW workers, for example, at engine and transmission plants, will lose their jobs. And if lower-paying battery plants aren't union, workers won't have anywhere near the same wages and benefits. So here, my nightmare scenario is that we repeat, because of this administration's climate agenda, climate fixation, I would argue, we repeat and hypercharge the loss of industry we saw in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and we do it all over again. And so the remaining few things that we actually produce in this country, like automobiles, we won't produce anymore. And we may produce a few things, but even those will be co-owned with foreign companies. I mean, you mentioned steel. U.S. Steel, an iconic American company, backbone of our steel production in this country, is apparently about to sell to a foreign company. I hope your administration is going to block that sale. I've urged the president to block it. He should absolutely block it. But for heaven's sake, let's not see what remains of our proud and strong auto industry be completely co-opted by foreign governments, foreign entities, and U.S. workers are left with very little. I mean, that's just a nightmare scenario. Wouldn't you agree?
So I'm a firm believer in playing offense. And I think we're playing offense right now. I think we're being intentional. We're being aggressive. We're being purposeful. The fact that we have 136,000 new jobs
I don't think giving
across the
tax
country,
subsidies to Chinese companies is
including
playing offense, Mr. Turk.
1,250 new jobs in Missouri because of these investments, because of these targeted, directed investments, planning for the future and making sure we're winning and competing against China. China is working incredibly aggressively to dominate.
And your administration is helping them now by giving them these tax subsidies. And we are losing thousands of jobs because of your climate mandates that are forcing our production overseas and gutting our workforce. I don't understand it.
Everything we're doing in this space, and happy to go chapter and verse on all the provisions that we're working on, is to reshore, to make sure that these jobs, to make sure this economic opportunity is U.S. and our allies across the world. We've got a huge economic opportunity here. And the last thing we need to do is sit by idly like what we've done in our country for too long. We're stepping up. We're playing offense. We're winning right now. My biggest fear is that someone puts a brake on it and we're not able to compete. Right now we're competing and we're starting to win.
My biggest fear is that the Wall Street banks, they make a bunch of money on it because they've all invested in these foreign companies. And the foreign companies make a bunch of money on it. And we lose thousands of American jobs and American workers get their pay cut in half. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for indulging me.
While the Department of Energy representative argues they're working to diversify supply chains, Hawley remains deeply skeptical. At the heart of this debate is a fundamental question. Are these green energy policies truly serving American workers, or are they inadvertently strengthening our economic rivals? It's a complex issue that goes far beyond just electric vehicles. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth policy breakdowns like this one. See you next time.